If you really want to understand why electric vehicles will never take over, you first need to understand big oil. Oil isn't just a product, it's the backbone of the global economy. It fuels cars, planes, ships, manufacturing, plastics, fertilizers, and even the military. In other words, oil isn't just energy, it's power. Whoever controls oil doesn't just control profits, they control nations. Look back at history. Every time there's been a so-called threat to oil, the industry has found a way to co-opt it, outlast it, or outright crush it. In the 1970s, when America faced oil shocks from the Middle East, there were loud calls to break free from foreign oil. Politicians promised renewable independence, nuclear power, and ethanol fuel. But here we are, 50 years later, still chained to crude oil, still importing barrels by the millions. Nuclear was demonized by lobbying and fear campaigns. Ethanol was pushed into a tiny niche, and oil kept its throne. Big oil plays the long game. They know markets move in cycles. They've survived OPEC embargoes, recessions, wars, climate protests, and even attempts at government regulation. They always adapt, always pivot. And electric vehicles are no different. EVs are not a real threat to oil. They're controlled opposition. Oil companies themselves are some of the biggest investors in so-called green energy. Why? Because they know they can use EV hype to make themselves look progressive while keeping their oil operations running at full blast. Take Shell, BP, and ExxonMobil. Each of these companies has announced billions in renewable investments. But if you look closely at their balance sheets, less than 5% of their spending actually goes into green projects. The rest? Oil, gas, and petrochemicals. They wave the EV flag for marketing while doubling down on drilling. That's not transition, that's greenwashing. There's also the financial reality. The oil industry brings in trillions of dollars every year. According to the International Energy Agency, oil and gas profits in 2022 alone topped $4 trillion, the highest in history. Compare that to the entire global EV market, valued at around $560 billion in 2023. Oil is nearly an order of magnitude bigger. You don't just replace a $4 trillion empire with an industry that still needs subsidies to survive. And consider geopolitics. The US military, the largest consumer of petroleum in the world, runs entirely on fossil fuels. Fighter jets don't fly on batteries. Aircraft carriers don't charge up like Teslas. Wars are fought over oil, not lithium. In fact, one of the unspoken reasons America invaded Iraq in 2003 was oil control. Big oil is deeply entangled with governments, militaries, and central banks. EVs simply don't have that same leverage. Every time people claim the oil age is over, the opposite happens. After the 1970s crisis, oil companies got bigger. After the Gulf War, they consolidated even further. After the 2008 financial crash, fracking brought on a new oil boom. And today, despite all the climate pledges, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Saudi Aramco are posting record profits. The supposed transition is not happening. Oil isn't dying, it's thriving. Here's the brutal truth. Oil is too valuable, too entrenched, and too powerful to ever go away. Electric vehicles are presented as a replacement, but in reality, they're just an accessory, a sideshow, a marketing tool to keep the public distracted while oil continues to dominate the core of the global system. So before anyone says EVs are going to take over, ask yourself this: has big oil ever truly lost a battle in the past century? The answer is no, and history shows us why they never will. If oil is the backbone of modern civilization, then batteries are supposed to be the foundation of the so-called electric future. But here's the problem. Batteries are fundamentally flawed. They're dirty, destructive, and unsustainable at the scale people imagine. Start with the basics. Electric vehicles run on lithium-ion batteries. To build just one Tesla Model S battery, you need roughly 63 kilograms of lithium, 22 kilograms of cobalt, 30 kilograms of nickel, and hundreds of kilograms of other materials like copper, graphite, and aluminum. That might not sound like much until you scale it. The International Energy Agency estimates that to replace the global car fleet with EVs, the world would need over 40 times more lithium, 25 times more cobalt, and 20 times more nickel than we produce today. That's not innovation, that's an ecological nightmare. Now let's talk about where these minerals come from. Lithium is mostly mined in Australia, Chile, and Bolivia, known as the Lithium Triangle. Mining lithium isn't some clean, futuristic process, it's destructive. In Chile's Atacama Desert, lithium mining consumes 65% of the region's water supply. drying up local lagoons and killing wildlife. Communities report droughts, poisoned soils, and dying livestock. In Bolivia, protests have erupted over foreign corporations exploiting indigenous lands to strip lithium reserves. Cobalt is even worse. More than 70% of the world's cobalt comes from the Democratic Republic of Congo, where tens of thousands of children as young as 7 work in dangerous artisanal mines. These kids dig with hand tools, exposed to toxic dust, all for a mineral that ends up in EVs marketed as ethical and green. Amnesty International and the Washington Post have documented horrific conditions: collapsed tunnels, workers buried alive, children coughing blood. Also, Western consumers can feel guilt-free about driving electric. And then there's China. Over 80% of the world's lithium refining and nearly 75% of all battery manufacturing is controlled by China. That means the supposed EV revolution is entirely dependent on a single geopolitical rival. If tensions with China escalate, supply chains collapse. Imagine the US military trying to secure fighter jets or trucks when the batteries are controlled by Beijing. That's not independence. That's a trap. The recycling argument doesn't save the industry either. Advocates like to claim EV batteries will be recycled, reducing the need for mining. But the truth is grim. Less than 5% of lithium-ion batteries worldwide are successfully recycled today. The rest end up in landfills or are downcycled into lower-quality materials. Recycling processes are expensive, energy-intensive, and often produce toxic waste of their own. So instead of solving the problem, recycling just delays it. There's also the issue of waste and replacement. A lithium-ion battery only lasts 8 to 12 years before it loses significant capacity. That means by 2035, when millions of first-generation EVs are hitting retirement, the world will be flooded with millions of tons of dead toxic battery packs. Unlike steel or aluminum, these aren't simple to reuse. They're hazardous, flammable, and filled with rare minerals that are hard to extract without creating more pollution. Case studies drive this point home. In 2021, a massive Tesla Megapack battery installation in Victoria, Australia, caught fire during testing. The blaze burned for 3 days, releasing toxic fumes. Firefighters admitted there was no way to extinguish it. They just had to let it burn out. That's the danger of lithium-ion at scale. Once a fire starts, it's nearly impossible to stop. And here's the kicker. Even if the battery supply chain could be scaled without collapsing, the environmental cost would dwarf the problem EVs are supposed to solve. A study from the Swedish Environmental Institute found that manufacturing a single EV battery emits up to 17.5 tons of CO2 before the car even drives a mile. In other words, your shiny new electric car has already created more emissions than a gas-powered Honda Civic driving for years. This is the dirty little secret. EVs aren't clean. They're outsourced pollution. The mining happens in South America and Africa. The refining happens in China. The waste ends up in landfills. And the West gets to pat itself on the back for going green. So when people say electric vehicles will replace gas cars, ask yourself, how do you scale an industry that requires destroying ecosystems, enslaving children, and creating mountains of toxic waste, all while depending on your geopolitical rivals to supply the parts? The answer is simple. You don't. The battery problem isn't solvable. It's the fatal flaw in the EV dream. Electric vehicles don't exist because of consumer demand. They exist because of politics. Without tax credits, subsidies, and mandates, the industry collapses overnight. Take the US. In the last decade, the government has poured tens of billions into EV subsidies. Buyers get tax breaks, automakers get federal loans, states like California mandate EV quotas. But none of this is organic. It's propped up theater, and politics cut both ways. In 2025, Trump returned to office and immediately rolled back federal EV mandates, weakened fuel economy standards, and challenged California's right to ban gas cars. One administration pushes EVs, the next dismantles the rules. This isn't stability, it's whiplash. How do you build a permanent future on a 4-year election cycle? You can't. The cracks are already showing. California, the supposed EV utopia, ordered blackouts in 2022 during a heat wave, then begged people not to charge their electric cars. The same state that mandated millions of EVs couldn't even keep the grid on when the temperature spiked. That's not progress, that's chaos. And don't forget geopolitics. The US wants EV independence, but China controls 75% of the world's EV battery supply chain. That means the same politicians waving the green flag are also tying the country's future to its biggest rival. If Beijing decides to weaponize lithium or nickel exports, just like OPEC used oil in the 1970s, the so-called EV revolution ends overnight. This isn't about clean air, it's about control. Governments and corporations push EVs not to replace oil, but to regulate how you move, where you go, and what you drive. It's not freedom, it's dependency dressed up as progress. Long-haul trucking is the backbone of America's supply chain. Diesel trucks can run 1,500 miles on a single tank and refuel in minutes. To match that with electricity, you'd need a battery weighing 10,000 to 15,000 pounds, eating into cargo space and profits. Charging is worse. Even with megawatt chargers, an electric semi needs 30 to 45 minutes to recharge. Multiply that by a fleet of trucks, and you're looking at grid demand equivalent to small cities. And here's the reality check. Those chargers don't even exist at scale. Tesla promised its semi in 2017. Yet by 2025, only a handful are on the road, and Pepsi admitted they can't run them on real long-haul routes. Then there's aviation. Jet fuel delivers nearly 50 times the energy per kilogram that lithium-ion batteries can. That's why a Boeing 747 can fly across the ocean, while an electric plane struggles to cross a state line. To power a passenger jet, the battery would weigh more than the aircraft itself. Physics won't bend to politics. Case studies prove it. The world's first electric passenger plane in Canada flew just 15 minutes before landing. Startups keep promising breakthroughs, but none come close to replacing kerosene. Airlines know this. That's why they're betting on synthetic fuels, not batteries. The truth is simple. Trucking and aviation are the crown jewels of oil, and no battery on Earth can dethrone them. EV advocates love to claim prices are dropping, but the numbers don't lie. The average new electric vehicle in the US still sells for over $53,000, far above the average gas car. That's not mass adoption, that's luxury. The so-called cheap EVs mostly come from China, where labor is cheap and environmental rules are weak. But tariffs and trade wars keep those models out of the US, leaving only expensive American SUVs and trucks. Automakers know where the profit is, and it isn't in affordable compacts for working families. Then there's the hidden costs. Insurance for EVs runs 20 to 30% higher than for gas cars, because repairs are expensive and parts are scarce. A single damaged battery pack can cost $15,000 to $20,000 to replace, more than many used cars are worth. That's why resale values are tanking. A recent study showed some used Teslas losing over 50% of their value in 3 years. Even Norway, often praised as the EV success story, exposes the problem. Yes, most new cars sold there are electric, but only because the government slashed taxes on EVs while piling them onto gas cars. It wasn't a natural shift, it was bribery. And now, as subsidies shrink, EV sales are already cooling off. This isn't sustainability, it's dependency on subsidies, on trade deals, and on consumers willing to gamble their savings on a car that might be worthless in 5 years. The truth is simple, EVs aren't affordable and they won't be. They're luxury products dressed up as necessity, sold to the public with taxpayer money. For most families, the EV dream will stay exactly that, a dream.